Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and this video will be continuing on my recasting series for Survivor, and here we'll be recasting Survivor All-Stars. So like my other recasting videos, we'll go through the entire cast of the season and talk about if I personally would have cast them, if it was my personal choice, and then talk about who I would have replaced them with if it is someone that I wouldn't have cast. And to me, All-Stars in particular has some very notable locks, but also a decent amount of people who are pretty big question marks, with there being very easy ways for them to have potentially made it a stronger overall cast that they just didn't end up taking, with them not picking certain people that we'll obviously be talking about. But as I said, we will be running through cast. I feel like we might as well go in boot order, starting off with Tina. And for me, I feel like Tina is an absolute lock here. I think Tina is obviously the second winner of the show, the first female winner of the show, has one of the biggest edits for a woman in the history of the show, and while she isn't as notable of a character as certain other people from her season, I mean, she is the winner of the most watched season of the show, and to not have Tina on here would be a bit of a travesty. And also something that we will be talking about later is the fact that I did end up putting more winners on this cast here to try to avoid the stigma that people had coming into the season of this anti-winner sentiment. So really for me, Tina was never a person that I would have even considered dropping here. Next up, we got Rudy, and I have to say, I did decide to cut Rudy. Now, I mean, I love Rudy as a character. He's such a fantastic character on Survivor Borneo, but I also feel like having him on All-Stars was essentially just to, like, have him on All-Stars. Like, I feel like Rudy had no shot coming into All-Stars, considering his age, and also how he had kind of declined physically. Like, it just never felt like he really had much of a chance. I mean, like, if we're really putting a cast together of the 18 biggest characters in Survivor history up to this point, like, obviously Rudy has to be there. But if we're looking at this from a more realistic standpoint of who would bring better TV and who would end up performing better, I do feel like the Rudy choice here felt a bit irresponsible. So the question for me was who to replace him. I did consider some people from Survivor Borneo. I mean, Greg is someone I would have loved to see back, but I don't think he wanted to come back, so didn't put him on. Jervis was someone I really considered, and I was actually surprised that you don't hear much about Jervis really being in that much of consideration for All-Stars, but I definitely considered him here. Considered a couple other people that, again, pretty big surprises that they weren't considered, people like a Varner or people like a John Carroll, who I thought were pretty notable figures at this point in Survivor history. Considered even a Clay from Survivor Thailand, but the person I did end up putting on here over Rudy is one of the most notable figures on the show at this point. I get why he wasn't on there, considering the season literally just aired, and actually was in the middle of airing at the time of filming, but how do you not have Johnny Fairplay on All-Stars? Now, I don't know if he actually turned it down, but I feel like that's very un-Johnny Fairplay of him to turn down an All-Star season. I think more than likely they didn't want to put too many Pearl Islands people on here. But I don't know. Like, it feels weird that they didn't put Fairplay on All-Stars, as I feel like Fairplay is such a clear lock. Now, I mean, All-Stars filmed before Fairplay really made his mark on the season, because they were still in the pre-merge of Pearl Islands. So the Dead Grandma lie had not happened yet. The dynamic gameplay of his endgame had not been shown yet. So it's like, I guess I get it from that aspect, but I mean, like, they should have known, like, how notable of a figure he was going to be post-season. So for me, I feel like Fairplay is someone that was notably missing from the All-Stars cast, and I did put him on here. Next up, we have Jenna Morasca, and I will say that I decided to keep her on the cast, but I don't feel great about it. Largely because, obviously, the situation of her having to quit the game because of her mom, obviously, like, just in general, she probably just shouldn't have been out there to begin with. But then again, she chose to be out there. And I don't know how in the know production was in terms of that entire situation. And with me also trying to keep more winners on the cast, I did decide to keep Jenna Morasca here. Yeah, I don't feel great about it. And there's one major reason that we'll talk about at the end of the video of why she is on here. But realistically, it's like, if she is going to quit, then I probably should have replaced her. But again, we'll talk about it later, but for now, again, she is on the cast. Next up, we got Rob Cesternino. I mean, lock. Absolute lock. I mean, how do you not have Rob Cesternino on All-Stars, especially so close to after the Amazon had just finished airing? I mean, Rob Cesternino got the most amount of screen time on that season by a lot. Was a really fun villain on the show. Played one of the most dynamic games in the history of the show up until that point. was named the best player to never win. I mean, for me, Rob Cesternino has to be a lock here. Not really a question. Next up, Richard Hatch. Absolute lock. I mean, again, how do you not have Richard Hatch the first winner on All-Stars here, especially when he's such a notable figure, even beyond the scope of Survivor at that point? I mean, I don't even know if you can really even have an All-Star season without people like a Richard Hatch here, who is so synonymous with the show at this point. So, again, absolute lock. Next up, we got Sue. Sue I ended up putting up as a lock. Again, another one that's such a notable figure for the show. Snakes and Rats speech is one of the most notable scenes, really, in all of television. And again, she was such a massive name at the time. Obviously, I did have some hesitancy here due to, obviously, a situation that ends up happening. And also the fact that even within the course of the game itself, it just felt like Sue didn't really do much and didn't really want to be there that badly. But she is still really iconic, and I feel like to lose her here on this cast would be a bit of a travesty, so decided to keep her on. Next up, we got Colby. Obviously, massive lock here. Again, one of the biggest heroes in the show up until this point. Massive fan favorite from Australian Outback, their most popular season. One of the most popular players of all time at this point. I mean, like, how do you not have Colby back? I think he's a lock. Next up, we got Ethan. Again, probably a lock. I mean, someone that I kept on largely because, again, he's a previous winner. Really likable guy. One of the biggest heroes. I think if it wasn't for this winner sentiment, I maybe would have tried to replace him because, like, at the end of the day, it's like, I don't know how much I would have expected him to change on a return. Mind you, I was very happy with his run on All-Stars, but I don't know if I would have expected him to have that run coming into it. But still, me trying to put more winners on the cast, Ethan was never really in consideration to drop off here. Next up, we got Jerri Manthey, absolute lock. And another one of the bigger locks on the board. And such a massive villain for the show, one of the most notable figures from the show, again, from the most popular season of the show. And also the possibility of bringing back Colby and Jerri. It's like, how do you not bring Jerri back here? Absolute lock. Next up, Lex. Another one, probably a massive lock. Again, one of the biggest players from Survivor Africa. Got the most amount of screen time by the end of the season. Was really one of the first players to play a dominant game. Yet also did not win at the end. And I think that set up a really interesting arc for a return. Absolute lock for Lex. Next up, we got Kathy Vavrick O'Brien. Also an absolute lock. How do you not have Kathy on All-Stars? An incredible run on Marquesas. Was a massive fan favorite. Was one of the most dynamic players at that point in time. Was also just a really fun character. I mean, again, Kathy is a lock. And again, if you have not been paying attention, that is 9 people in a row there that were locks on the cast. Again, literally half of the cast there in a row, all locks. However, we're at the final 7 now, and there's literally only 1 lock left on the board, which is actually really humorous. Considering, again, I think that shows you how the boot order for All-Stars was probably not ideal. Let's move on to Alicia. And I did not put Alicia on the cast, mainly because I feel like Alicia is someone that's fine. I mean, again, like obviously the waving the finger in your face with Kimmy and stuff, that's a notable moment. And I wouldn't have been opposed to her returning here. Like, I think out of the people that I did end up cutting, I feel like her casting choice made the most sense to me outside of like a Rudy and maybe one more other person. But again, like it makes sense why she's cast. However, I feel like there's an easy replacement for her here and someone that, again, is a winner, and that is Vecepia. I think Vecepia is someone that allows you to have an extra winner on the cast. Is someone that is also physically strong, just like Alicia, but is also a better player than Alicia. And while she might not be the most dynamic TV in the world, and she's still not a slouch as a character. And I do think having her back as a winner to bring onto the cast is definitely something I would have liked. So I did put Vecepia on. Next, I've got Shii-Ann. And I mean, obviously, I didn't put Shii-Ann on the cast. I mean, Shii-Ann is such a weird casting choice in my eyes to be the only one to bring back from Thailand. Now, obviously, they didn't want to bring back a certain other person from Thailand that I may or may not be talking about soon. But to have her as the sole representative from Thailand is just kind of bizarre. So I did end up cutting her. The question was who to replace her. And there were a number of people. I did consider like a Gretchen from Borneo. I considered Tammy from Marquesas. Helen Glover would have been a nice replacement, though. To be honest, I've never been like super high on a Helen return. Dina would have been interesting. I did consider Sandra. However, from what I understand, Sandra did not want to come back for All-Stars and was asked, but was still too sick from her previous appearance to come back. So the person I ended up going with here, again, someone that I wish we got back, surprised that we still haven't gotten back up until this point, and that is T-Bird from Survivor Africa. Again, I would love to see a T-Bird return. And I think this was a pretty decent spot for her. Now, again, casting-wise, she is very similar to Tina and debatably like a Kathy. But again, I would still love to see T-Bird back. She's one of the best players from those earlier seasons. Again, another one of the more dynamic players from that point in Survivor history. So for me, I definitely wanted to see T-Bird back here. Next up, we got Big Tom. And I did cut Big Tom. Now, Big Tom is someone that, again, I fully get their casting choice. Obviously, Big Tom was a fan favorite at the time. He was a big character. However, to me, again, like it wasn't like he was going to bring much to the table gameplay-wise. And I feel like we got what we needed from him from Africa. But I was only going to replace him if I had a good replacement, to which I think I do. I did consider, obviously, like Scoopin', even though, again, obviously not modern Scoopin', but at the time, Scoopin' was a notable figure. I considered Roger, considered Clarence as like a replacement from Survivor Africa, considered Matthew, I guess, considered Savage. But the person I picked here was Brian Heidik. I mean, again, another winner to add to the cast, but also, again, like at this point, Brian Heidik's one of the best players to play the game, and to see him play again would be interesting. I don't think it would go well, but to also have a representative from Survivor Thailand here, now that I got rid of Shii-Ann, I do think Brian here is pretty much a lock for me personally. Next up, we got Rupert, and Rupert is the last lock on the cast for me. Again, Rupert is someone that, how do you have All-Stars after Pearl Islands and not have Rupert on? One of the most popular players to ever play the game, one of the biggest heroes in the history of the show up until that point. Such a notable figure, and someone that, again, how do you have All-Stars without him? Next up, we got Jenna Lewis, and I cut Jenna Lewis. I mean, as much as I do think Jenna Lewis played in an interesting way on the return, it's like, based off of her Borneo game, definitely not someone I was like super high on returning. The question was who replaced her, and there were a couple considerations, but really it came down to two Kellys. That being Kelly Wigglesworth and Kelly Goldsmith. And I really, really wanted to pick Kelly Goldsmith. However, due to a reason I will talk about later, and also of me trying to up the prestige of this cast, I did end up going with Kelly Wigglesworth. Again, like Kelly Goldsmith, I would love to see back. I thought this was a decent time to bring her back, but I think when we're having a lot of the all-time greats, whether that be from a character or player standpoint, I do feel like Kelly Goldsmith feels a bit out of place on this cast, especially like the revamped cast I'm building here. While Kelly Wigglesworth, again, like was the runner-up of the original season, maybe wasn't the most riveting TV, and we do see a return in Second Chance and isn't the most riveting TV, but I do think the prestige was there, and for certain other reasons that we'll talk about somewhat soon, I did end up putting Kelly Wigglesworth on the cast. Next up, we got Boston Rob, and I'll be honest, I wanted to keep Boston Rob on the cast. I mean, Boston Rob is someone that I really like on Marquesas. I mean, while it is, again, very icky, the situation with him outing John Carroll, I just think from a TV character standpoint, and even from a gameplay standpoint, he plays the game in a way that we hadn't really seen up until that point, and he's able to talk to the camera in a way we hadn't seen. So I would have loved to have Boston Rob on here, but, I mean, how do I not put Sean Rector on this cast? I did go Sean Rector over Boston Rob. Again, I'm not upset at the Boston Rob pick. I know some people are like really questioning why he was even on All-Stars. I don't really question it. However, I do think Sean feels like a better pick here. And like, again, considering almost everyone on my final cast here made it pretty deep into the game, where I think there's only a couple people that got like 8th place, but everyone else was top 5. I feel like Sean fits this cast a lot more than Boston Rob. So I did go with Sean over him. And the final spot here is Amber, and I mean, obviously I cut Amber. I mean, why was Amber even on there? Outside the fact she was from Australian Outback, but really there was only one major consideration for me on who to replace her with, and I did end up going with her, and that is the runner-up from Survivor Marquesas. I did go with Neleh. I don't know how great of TV she really was, but again, she's the runner-up of that season, and she may have not played the best game in the world there, but I do feel like she was someone that like started to get the game more after the show. I don't know if she was exactly all there by the time of All-Stars, but I do feel like if she were to return now in the modern day, she would play a lot differently, and I would be very interested in seeing Neleh return now. But I feel like at the time of All-Stars, it's like, again, give her another shot. Why not? Again, she kind of fits into the overall theme that we'll be talking about in a second. So yeah, put Neleh on. But there we go. I mean, that's the entire cast. Before we go, I should talk about how I broke up this cast, because I did also decide to break up this cast into radically different tribes than what we got on the original season. Because I think one of the biggest faults of the original season was how big of targets the original winners were and how certain people had major targets on their back. And I feel like a way to counter that was to separate the tribes based on placement. So I did decide to do that here. And as I said before, that is why I kept Jenna Morasca on the cast. I do have a winners tribe here where we do have Tina, Jenna Morasca, Richard Hatch, Ethan Zohn, Vecepia Towery, and Brian Heidik. The Mogo Mogo tribe essentially turns into a second/third place tribe. Again, it's a bit wonky because the genders didn't really work out particularly well, where I end up having one extra person here, but whatever. Again, runners up and final jurors here. So for Mogo Mogo, we have Rob Cesternino, we have Colby Donaldson, we have Lex Vanderberg, we have Kathy Vavrick O'Brien, we have Kelly Wigglesworth, and we have Neleh Dennis. And then the leftovers, essentially. So people who I guess have something to prove, I guess. People that didn't make it to the very, very end, with the exception of the first person we'll be talking about here in Johnny Fairplay, who, again, didn't quite fit into the other grouping, but I think pairing him up with Rupert would be a really fun dynamic here on All Stars. But then we also have Sue Hawk, Jerri Manthey, T-Bird Cooper, and Sean Rector. So there we go. That is my recasting of Survivor All Stars. And I do think this is a very plausible cast if they wanted to do it. It's just I feel like some of these casting choices, they were pretty anti the consideration of them returning for whatever reason. I don't know exactly what the next recasting video will be. Maybe it'll be Blood versus Water, or maybe some other really weird thing. I don't know. I haven't exactly thought it through, but I'm sure I'll continue this series moving forward. Also would like to do more for other series like Big Brother Canada, Australian Survivor, stuff like that down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.